Nikki Haley and Donald Trump hated each other on the Republican campaign trail. I mean, definitely relative to the rest of the competition outside of maybe Chris Christie, they were the most vicious, with Nikki Haley really going towards Donald Trump's record as somebody who massively expanded the budget deficit, which was something that other Republicans were a lot more hesitant to go after. Her going after Donald Trump's lack of being able to achieve much of his policy priorities while in the office, going after Donald Trump for saying that Russia should go after different NATO countries if they don't pay the 2% NATO minimum that is requested of NATO states, that while not mandatory, there's been a lot of talk of making it mandatory. And in an effort to try to squeeze more money out of them, he was suggesting maybe Russia should invade countries. Now that doesn't really, I think, show strong deterrence, and certainly was something that angered Nikki Haley. And from Donald Trump, I mean, Donald Trump said everything you can imagine he would say about somebody like Nikki Haley. So I'll just keep it simple, and instead of going through the cavalcade of insults and attacks that he's thrown at Nikki Haley to try to get her out of the race when the primary was going on, I'll just say the big one. He basically declared a fatwa against not only Nikki Haley, but anybody that assisted Nikki Haley in her race against him during the Republican primary, saying that anybody who assisted Nikki Haley, not only Nikki Haley herself, but anybody who assisted Nikki Haley would be banned from the MAGA movement, would not be receiving Donald Trump support, and would be, quote unquote, their words, blacklisted. So not only was there a disincentive on Nikki because of that type of repercussion, but there was a giant disincentive on anybody working with Nikki. But she continued to run anyway for months after he said that. Not like 7, 8, 9 months, but months, like 2 or 3 more months after that was said. She kept trudging along. But eventually she dropped out. Now, that could have been the end of it. Donald Trump continues his political career, saying nothing more about Nikki Haley than she worked for me at the UN for a little bit. She was great then she sucked. Don't know why it happened, or maybe she was always terrible. She hit her going her own way, waiting for the Trump momentum, the Trump train to derail and crash, and then coming to pick up the pieces. But instead, we're getting something that's eerily relevant of the 2016 Republican primary. So anybody who has been paying attention to the Trump era since the start might recall a moment like this or two where politicians Donald Trump had lambasted, including Ted Cruz here, who Donald Trump criticized his wife. And when I say criticized, I mean he called his wife ugly, and that was his quote-unquote critique of his wife. He still came out at the end of the day when he was the last candidate against Trump and phone banged for him, supported him, and everybody saw it as pretty pathetic. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people saw it as pretty pathetic. And so everybody's getting flashbacks right now, back to the 2016, 2015 Republican primary, and Ted Cruz being the last one to bend the knee. But the reason I'm talking about the bending of the knee is because Nikki Haley, after everything was said and done, some people questioned if she would be willing to bend the knee, definitely since after she dropped out, she left her endorsement up in the air. Well, after being disappeared, maybe as a hermit in a cave for a few months, or going off to the mountains in Nepal to discover herself, I don't know what she does in her free time, and I don't frankly care. She has come back, and she says that she is going to vote for Donald Trump. And for all intents and purposes, this is Nikki Haley's official endorsement of Donald Trump. This is her bending the knee. Now, she didn't bend the knee completely. She didn't say everything I ever said was wrong, Donald Trump is great, but she didn't need to do that, really. She didn't. What Donald Trump needed was for Nikki Haley to calm her base down and try to soothe them towards voting for Donald Trump. Because if you look at the results in the primary states, as the Republican primary continues, after Nikki Haley dropped out, there are states where Nikki Haley is still getting 20 to 25% of the vote. 20 to 25%. And when you're talking about swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, we're talking about like 100,000 people to 200,000 people. In Virginia, it was notable too. And so if you're talking about swing states with hundreds of thousands of votes, with a lot of the exit polling data from those primaries with Nikki Haley voters saying, like around half. And they don't even need half, but even part of that percentage. But they're saying half of those Nikki Haley voters are coming back saying, I'm not going to vote for Trump. Trump doesn't have my vote. Part of the reason I am with Nikki is because I don't like the Trumpification of the Republican Party. And so Donald Trump, seeing that outcome again and again and again in Republican primary after Republican primary after Republican primary, not only in random states, but in the states that everybody's going to be paying attention to on election day, all of a sudden that fatwa started to get questioned. And there was reports from within Donald Trump's camp that he was reflecting on whether or not he should have really kicked Nikki Haley out onto the curb as a potential option for vice president or for building any coalition. Because if he's going to beat Joe Biden, I mean, Donald Trump's never won the popular vote. He's going to need every vote he can get, especially in the swing states like Pennsylvania, which he lost last time, like Georgia, which he lost last time, like Michigan, in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, which he lost last time, Arizona, Nevada. I could do this all day. And so we don't know how those private conversations between Nikki Haley's team and Donald Trump's team went. In fact, we have some indication that there really wasn't that much communication to begin with. But I want to show you what Nikki Haley said about endorsing Donald Trump. Now, I could just read this message, but I think it would probably be better if I just played you the clip of Nikki Haley talking.
You opened with some comments on the administration and the Democratic Party. You then talked a little bit about some of the shortcomings or worries you have about the Republican Party. And I couldn't help but think of two names when I heard you deliver that speech, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So on these issues, these national security critical issues that you've described today, who do you think would do a better job in the White House, Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
As a voter, I put my priorities on a president who's going to have the backs of our allies and hold our enemies to account, who would secure the border, no more excuses, a president who would support capitalism and freedom, a president who understands we need less debt, not more debt. Trump has not been perfect on these policies. I've made that clear.
He hasn't been successful on any of them. Donald Trump created the largest deficit in American history. He increased the debt by $8 trillion. Donald Trump, which Nikki Haley herself complained about, talked about turning his back on European allies and has been one of the forces holding back aid from Ukraine as the congressional debate heated up and it started to integrate itself into the immigration debate as these two unrelated issues were smashed together due to the flows and ebbing of domestic American politics. Freedom, I mean, I don't know how vague you want to get or what she means by the, catchword freedom, Maybe she just means like a nice hot dog and a beer on a Sunday with a NASCAR. But if she's talking about freedom of expression, freedom of the press, Donald Trump has a very confrontational relationship with the press and is also somebody who's openly talked about the need to loosen up libel laws. His open statement that those who burn the American flag need to go to prison, which if somebody cares about the First Amendment is for those who engage in, risky speech and dangerous speech and speech that is, on the edges of society. You don't have freedom, the First Amendment, so I can say, Bakugan were cool. You have the First Amendment, so I could say that blades are for nerds or for like whatever unpopular opinion it was, whatever it is. That's the point of freedom of expression. So if you're calling for people who burn the American flag to be arrested, then it sounds like you're saying that your First Amendment dedication, your dedication to freedom of expression, as somebody who's known as the truth teller, is paper thin, because immediately once somebody says something or does something that hurts your fifis, you're going to collapse in on it. You're going to collapse in on these principles that you want to be held to the utmost when it comes to your own conduct. So on any of these metrics, Donald Trump is worse. And we can talk about Ukraine as like, an abandoning of allies. We could talk about his statement around, withdrawing support to NATO allies depending upon how much they pay into NATO and making it look like he legitimately couldn't care less about European defense, whether it was his abandonment of the Kurds and then his justification for abandoning the Kurdish allies with, well, you know, they weren't with us at D-Day. There's all this ridiculous nonsense after ridiculous nonsense after ridiculous nonsense. Like, any of the principles she laid out there, outside of maybe capitalism, but even, like, I could, like, talk about protectionism, but also Joe Biden engages in protectionism. So maybe outside of all of that, maybe not capitalism. Maybe that's, like, the one area where maybe, okay, maybe Donald Trump is deep down in his heart a more red-blooded capitalist. I mean, he's definitely more anti-union than than Joe Biden is. But I don't know how any of these metrics you could use to say, I got to go with Donald Trump, the foreign policy option. The guy who was talking about, you know, invading Venezuela, but just like throwing these ideas out there and then forgetting about them. So his staff just doesn't talk to him about it. And he just doesn't bring it up again, just hoping and praying that he doesn't remember about the commands he gave them. This is the guy that we're going to lead as the foreign policy option. When Joe Biden's been on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee for most of his career, I'm not trying to show Joe Biden to be the number one foreign policy brain, but this feels like careerism at its worst from Nikki Haley. If she said something like, I believe Donald Trump's economic policies are better, or if she just stick to like, I'm much more anti-union, or I'm in favor of right to work laws. All these are things that I can conceive of. But on the foreign policy front, when you're talking to the Hudson Institute, no, get out of here. AGAX2173, thank you for the tier 1. Take my money, you handsome CIA asset. Thank you.
Here, many, many times. But Biden has been a catastrophe. So I will be voting for Trump. Having said that, I stand by what I said in my suspension speech. Trump would be smart to reach out to the millions of people who voted for me and continue to support me and not assume that they're just going to be with him. And I genuinely hope he does that.
Man, can I just play a quick statement from her from a little bit earlier? Just less than a year ago.
It's not normal to spend $50 million in campaign contributions on personal court cases. It's not normal to threaten people who back your opponent. And it's not normal to call on Russia to invade NATO countries. Donald Trump has done all of that.
How do you say he called on Russia to invade NATO countries and then say you got to endorse Donald Trump because he's the one that's willing to stand with our allies? Is it because he didn't want to is because Joe Biden didn't want to blow up Gaza enough and Donald Trump would be like, cool, yeah, whatever, as he like, I don't know, like makes doodles on his notepad? I mean, I understand Donald Trump's policy is, and Nikki Haley is an actual neocon. When people use the word neocon, sometimes they just mean the word hawk. But no, she is a neocon as you would think a neocon is. She probably is not going to be as bothered by Donald Trump's statements along the lines of, if you want to kill terrorists, blow up their families. Maybe not because she's in moral alignment, but because she wants to be aggressive on the terrorists. She wants to be aggressive on these players in the region. So is it really that just because Joe Biden is willing to leverage some, not even all, but some offensive, not even including defensive weapons are going to be assumed to be given to Israel no matter what happens. Benjamin Netanyahu could beat a blind puppy out front of the Knesset and they will still get their missile interceptors no matter what. That is an American priority for our government. And that would be a priority for any other government that takes their place. I mean, even the Bernie Sanders government would most likely end up giving them the interceptors. So is it the lack of all of the offensive weapons? Is it the lack of complete full-throated support? Is it the lack of here, removing it to Jerusalem? Could this all really just be boiled down to Trump's policy on Israel, Gaza? Which, as far as I know, Trump also hasn't abandoned the idea of a two-state solution. So, well, how much of a break is it really for her to just say, I am going to compromise on the fact that I said that this man disregards our allies, say that he actually, when it comes to putting my vote behind somebody, does enough to get my vote, when she was saying he was encouraging the invasion of NATO allies, meaning that for her, she can say that she's supporting the candidate that's going to stand with American allies as he calls for invasion of American allies, according to her own standard. And she said, we just listened to her. She said that no matter, all of this hubbub that's happened since then, and now that she's endorsing Trump, she still stands by everything she said. So we cannot just say, oh, well, that was then and this is now. And since then, she's reflected. She hasn't issued any correction. Donald Trump hasn't put out some statements saying now he loves Nikki Haley. He hasn't done anything like that. He hasn't called out to her supporters and tried to win them over. That's why even in the statement where she's endorsing him, she's still basically begging him to try to make inroads into the people who voted for her in the primary. Come on, Nikki.
And more in just the past month. Look, I've said it many times. I think Donald Trump was the right president at the right time. But times change, and so has Trump. He's gotten more unstable and unhinged.
Unstable and unhinged. Unstable and unhinged. What's worse? Catastrophe, unstable, unhinged. Because she said that Joe Biden's a catastrophe. But unstable and unhinged, I guess you can go with.
He spends more time in courtrooms than he does on the campaign trail. He refuses to debate. He's completely distracted. And everything is about him.
It's true.
He's so obsessed with his own demons from the past, he can't focus on delivering the future Americans deserve.
This type of stuff should be much more humiliating in politics. I understand that a campaign is a campaign, and you have to get the type of rhetoric you have on the campaign trail and the type of rhetoric you have sitting down and making legislation is going to be very different. But when you go out there and you say that your opponent is advocating for the invasion of NATO allies, he's unstable, he's unhinged, you lay into them like this, and then you build a movement based off of not being that guy, based off of not wanting to accept the magnification of the Republican Party, and then with no real even arc of development, you just kind of disappear, reappear, and say, never mind, we need to support our allies on the world stage, so I'm going to go endorse the person that I said a few months ago was advocating for Russia to invade our allies. This type of stuff should really catch more attention when it happens, because it would mean that when people say words in politics, it would mean something more. Because I would much rather her just stayed out of it if this was going to be her contribution. Just said, I said my piece, I gave people my opinion on the election, I'm staying out of it till the election day. I'm staying out of it till everybody submits their ballots. She could have done that. She decided not to. She decided, in my mind, for some reason, after we're hearing all these stories about Donald Trump reconsidering her as part of the administration, either as vice president or some other role, considering the amount of people that are still coming out to support her, and the fact that he's going to need every vote if he means to win this race, I think that she is playing politics here. And that her words that she's saying that she still stood by, she's not standing by. Because if she did, then what she's saying is she's voting for an unstable loser who has advocated for Russia to invade our allies. Which wouldn't make any sense, considering these are all things that she said were antithetical to what she believed in. Unless there was some other factor at play. Either A, he's offered her some big position in order to make her flip, B, that she believes that she can get some policy concessions out of Trump that would make it so it would be worth saying that she still wants to vote for Trump. We haven't heard anything like that. Or C, which would be saddest, that she thinks that if she said something like this after hearing the stories of Trump, wanting to hand over a little bit of power maybe over to her to get that coalition together, that she's now just putting out signals wildly in an attempt to get his support, get his attention, and envelop her in the MAGA movement. I don't know what it is. It's impossible to say, but either way, she is throwing away all of the reason why she had any popularity with the base that she had in the first place. And it does look like her words amounted to a whole lot of nada. Ted Cruz, point two? Maybe.